Today I've compiled my Iron Man trilogy reviews into one complete video analysis, as best as I could. For those who've already seen my individual reviews, I've added a segment at the end of the video going over my thoughts on the entire trilogy. You'll find timestamps below, so let's dive into the trilogy surrounding the character that kick-started the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Marvel Studios took a leap of faith with the character of Iron Man. What followed was a trilogy that would not only gross over $2.4 billion worldwide, but would also establish the groundwork for the most successful film franchise in cinematic history. These movies revolutionized the superhero genre and told a pretty beautiful story of a man, Tony Stark, and his redemption from an egotistical arms dealer to a, well, egotistical superhero. The movie is incredibly well structured and well written. I find that the story is great for the initial entry to the cinematic universe, as it introduces things such as the 10 Rings and the Stark weapons industry, all of which is still finding its way into the latest phases with movies like Shang-Chi and Armor Wars if they're still making that. So they clearly knew what they were doing early on in the game. They had foundations set and they went with it. In fact, this movie actually had 4 writers. These were Mark Fergus, Hawk Otsby, Art Markham, and Matt Holloway. From researching this movie, I've actually found some stories about the writing process. According to Jeff Bridges, Obadiah Stane, the writing for the film was actually happening as they were filming scenes, so the actors practically had no script for the movie at times. This was because the writers were hired as filming began. Considering that, they did a great job. I mean, I somewhat enjoyed the plot, but to get each character right and to keep those personalities going for 10 years? It's an amazing achievement. The director of Iron Man was no other than Happy Hogan himself, otherwise known as Jon Favreau. A great director and actor. I recently watched a video on how he wrote and starred in one of his first movies, Swingers, and how he barely had any money to even produce it. It then went on to make $4.6 million at the domestic box office, which was a massive accomplishment. Now let's talk about the action pieces in the movie. A lot of it was very practical, especially the flying scenes. They look notably amazing compared to the more recent films like Captain Marvel. When she's flying, you can really tell it's all just CG. I read an article with Jon Favreau where he compared the shots with Top Gun, and he wondered how they managed to film those scenes back when CGI didn't really exist. And I respect them for taking the time to think about it and make it look as realistic as they could. The fighting scenes looked and sounded amazing, especially the repulsors. There was just something about the first time he uses it that hits hard. It's iconic and very intimidating. Mix that with the amazing suit and the soundtrack for the movie, featuring AC/DC and Black Sabbath, it makes for a fascinating watch. The suit was half practical, half CG. This is where I think the peak of superhero costumes was at for me. Now we have mostly CGI suits and they feel off compared to this. Making it practical really harmonized with this movie, especially as he's in the initial stage of building the Iron Man suit, so it's going to be this chunky, heavy piece of equipment. I should really shout out the VFX artists in this movie. They did an amazing job making everything look incredible. Keep in mind this was in 2008, it could have been terrible. The VFX supervisor for Iron Man was John Nelson. He also had the task of finding a way to make Iron Man's heads-up display, or HUD, look the most realistic and easy to shoot. Again, it became something iconic. There was also something fascinating about how they dealt with the technology that Tony Stark uses. The holograms were way ahead of its time and the way he used them just looks unreal. You know the scene where he puts his hand in the holographic repulsor and it's like he's wearing the real thing? That felt revolutionary at the time. This also paved the way for how they portrayed the technology in the MCU. Even in Black Panther, Shuri uses more advanced tech, and you can see the similarities. Now, of course I'm going to have to talk about Robert Downey Jr.'s impact on this film. At the time, it was a huge gamble to even cast him, as 5 years prior to this, in 2003, he had only just become sober after years of drug abuse and multiple trips to prison. It's clear to see now that he has turned his life around. Apparently the whole reason Jon Favreau settled on him was because of Robert Downey Jr.'s past, as he felt that it ran parallel with Tony Stark's story in the comics. It's still surprising to me that the studio even went ahead with it. Clearly it was the right decision. Although they did have a few other choices before they finally set on Robert Downey Jr. Actors such as Hugh Jackman, Tom Cruise, Timothy Olyphant, Leonardo DiCaprio, and funnily enough, Sam Rockwell, who went on to play Justin Hammer in Iron Man 2. Robert Downey Jr. plays the role excellently and captures his portrayal of Tony Stark incredibly well. Tony here is just as egotistical and self-centered as he is in the comics. This speaks not only to the way Robert Downey Jr. depicts Iron Man, but from the writing as well. Of course, we get an iteration of Pepper Potts in the movie, played by Gwyneth Paltrow. I've never really enjoyed Gwyneth's portrayal of Pepper, she always felt so flat. I do however like the banter between her and Tony. It's amusing to watch them argue and bicker, but in terms of a relationship, I don't think they suit each other. There wasn't really a chemistry between them. Talking about chemistry though, we do get Happy Hogan. Like I said earlier, he's played by Jon Favreau, and he does an amazing job. The friendship between him and Tony is real, and you can feel it here. He's a funny character, and it's mostly just his mannerisms and the way he responds to Tony that makes him entertaining to watch. We get Rhodey in this movie. He's played by Terrence Howard, who's famously the first person to be cast in the MCU, although he gets replaced by Don Cheadle in the future movies. This was because Marvel wanted to dock his pay, but Terrence wanted to get what he was contracted for. Although looking into this, he was paid $4.5 million for his small role in Iron Man. Yet Robert Downey Jr. was paid $2 million for his protagonist role in the film. This makes sense as to why Marvel felt the need to dock his pay and increase Robert Downey Jr.'s in the sequel. However, it caused tension between Terrence and Downey, as Downey was getting paid $10 million for the sequel, and Marvel wanted to give $8 million to Terrence. Terrence's performance wasn't bad. I felt like he resembles Rhodey from the comics more than Don Cheadle. He looks more like he's from a military background, and I did like the friendship between him and Tony. But it's quite forgettable other than the connection between Tony and Rhodey in the second movie. In the cave where Tony Stark is captured, we see a man called Ho Jensen, played by Sean Tubb, who captures his role so casually and pulls it off incredibly well. What's strange is that I barely see anyone mentioning Jensen, and yet he's one of the most pivotal players in this movie. He helped Tony create the suit and sacrificed himself to help Tony escape. He was a legend. Due to this, Stark started to learn from what Jensen taught him, and it made him more of the selfless hero we get in future movies. For the villain of the movie, we get Obadiah Stane, also known as the Ironmonger. He's a business rival of Tony. He tries to disguise himself as a friend of Tony's early on. It later turns out that Obadiah was the person who sent the 10 Rings organization after Tony, to then take over the Stark Industries company. He's portrayed by Jeffrey Bridges, who does a very clever job of coming across as an aggressive psychopath. His portrayal is very memorable, especially this scene.
Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps!
Like I said earlier, there's a couple of appearances in this that paved the way for upcoming Marvel projects and characters. Agent Coulson gets a brief debut. Having someone who worked for S.H.I.E.L.D. play a role in this was actually massive, especially for the future of the MCU. It opened up so many avenues for them, as they could then incorporate S.H.I.E.L.D. into other movies like Thor and Captain America, allowing them to piece this whole tapestry together very early on. There's a brief cameo in the post-credits scene of Samuel L. Jackson's character, Nick Fury, coming to Tony and talking about the Avengers Initiative. Being huge at the time, it went on to be a continuous ritual for a Marvel movie to do. Okay, let's jump into some trivia for the movie. Some of you might already know these, but some of these are quite interesting, such as Robert Downey Jr. improvised the line "I am Iron Man." Paul Bettany, the voice of the Jarvis AI, has said that he hasn't even watched the movie and that this was the easiest role ever. He says it was like a robbery since he only worked for 2 hours and got paid a lot of money. The car Tony was working on in the first act of the film is actually owned by Jon Favreau. The Iron Man 1966 theme song can be heard on occasion. And Stan Lee makes a brief appearance as he plays the role of Hugh Hefner, and is said to be his favourite of his many cameos. Okay, I'm going to do a rating segment with this series and rank all the MCU movies I review. So with this one, it has to be up there in the S tier, and I think a lot of people will be with me on that. The movie's success can be attributed to several factors. I mean, Robert Downey Jr.'s charismatic portrayal of Tony Stark, which set the tone for the entire MCU. Jon Favreau's skilled direction as he balances action, humor, and the character development. It has impressive visual effects that still hold up today, particularly the practical effects used for the Iron Man suit. It had a well-structured story that laid the groundwork for future MCU installments, and the strong supporting performances that brought the depth to the world of Tony Stark. Despite the challenges in the writing process, the movie managed to deliver a coherent and engaging narrative. Iron Man not only revitalized Marvel as a brand, but also redefined what audiences could expect from superhero movies. It set a new standard for character development, visual effects, and interconnected storytelling in the genre, proving that with the right combination of talent, vision, and a bit of risk-taking, even a B-list superhero can become a cultural icon. Iron Man 2 was released in 2010. It's the sequel to the groundbreaking Iron Man, and it continues to build on the foundation of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The film delves deeper into the character of Tony Stark, played once again by Robert Downey Jr., as he grapples with the responsibilities of being a superhero and the legacy of his father's technology. The film faced high expectations, but ultimately it didn't live up to them. There were mixed reviews after release, and most of the reasons were because of pacing, poor villain arcs, and the execution of the final act. However, I found the movie to be a delight to watch. It carried the same charm as the previous movie, and it managed to keep the same sort of intensity as it did previously. I do agree with the fact that the villain seemed underwhelming for a sequel. The action in the movie was exhilarating to watch, especially the iconic racecourse scene and the War Machine team-up in the final act. Iron Man 2 had a more complex narrative, introducing key elements that would shape the MCU, such as S.H.I.E.L.D's larger role and the introduction of Natasha Romanoff, played by Scarlett Johansson. The production faced challenges with balancing character development and setting up future storylines, but it managed to maintain the charm and wit that fans loved. The sequel is again directed by Jon Favreau, although it was the last time that Favreau would direct a Marvel movie. I did some research on the subject, and he spoke about how the production of the movie felt too robotic after Disney acquired Marvel. A summary of what he says is that the first Iron Man film felt like an indie movie, whereas the second was made right after Disney bought the rights to Marvel. They had to do long hours as they only had 2 years to storyboard, film, and edit it. There had to be a schedule and a timeline of how scenes were shot, so there was no longer any room for improvisation, and the cast weren't having as much of an enjoyable experience as they were last time. You can see now that this may have been a factor into why some characters such as Ivan Vanko, Whiplash, felt rushed. Considering that, the film was produced incredibly well, and managed to keep that early Marvel nostalgia. It does go to show that rushing media like this causes it to have severe impacts on cast members and the production crew. A very similar thing has been going on currently because of the greedy fat cats at Disney, but it's good to know that they're pushing it all back a bit and giving their employees time to produce better quality work. The movie was written by Justin Theroux, who also wrote Tropic Thunder. Only one writer this time around, unlike the first Iron Man movie that had 4 writers. This time the writing process wasn't as premature. The script was written before the filming of the movie, which meant for less improv written into the scenes, which I think might have been what made the movie feel less casual and autonomous. The action sequences in Iron Man 2 were a spectacle, with improved special effects and more elaborate set pieces. The Monaco racing scene stands out as a highlight. It showcases Tony Stark's ingenuity with a brand new way of him equipping the Iron Man armor, be it a suitcase. The way he uses it and how it mechanically forms around his body is still incredible today. I much more prefer this to any nanosuit tech that we've been getting recently. Surprisingly, this wasn't the only upgrade Tony was packing. With the help of his father's old designs and newer technology, he discovers a brand new element. I'll expand on this a bit more in the connection segment of the video because this element interweaves with other Marvel projects. Because of this discovery, he integrates it with his arc reactor, creating this sustainable and fancy new look. I do like the look of this chest armor, but I do also feel like the character suits the circular reactor. The armor for Rhodey looked epic, his minigun was incredibly well utilized in the final fight scene. Some of those action pieces were very entertaining to watch. Whilst we're talking about the final act, we may as well get into it. The costume for Whiplash was okay. I don't like how it basically just copied Iron Man's suit. I would have preferred if he kept the makeshift look he had in the racecourse scene. Something about it being built in a hurry and out of scraps really gave some definition to the character. His death scene was apparently left ambiguous because Marvel wasn't sure if they were going to return to his character, but to me it looked like he got absolutely obliterated. The teamwork between Rhodey and Tony was fun to see, especially the way they both used repulsors against each other's, creating a massive energy bomb, being a callback to what they did in Tony's Malibu house. I haven't mentioned him yet, but Justin Hammer is also an antagonist in this film, played by Sam Rockwell, a frontrunner for the Iron Man role, which I mentioned in my review for Iron Man. Anyway, Rockwell's performance in this was fun to watch. He brings a vibrancy to the character, even though he's a diabolical business rival of Tony. His intentions are to bring an army of Iron Man-esque battle droids to eclipse Stark Industries and be at the top of the weapons market. The droids were created by Ivan Vanko, as Justin Hammer hired him to compete with Tony's creations, although Ivan's goal was to use them to kill Tony and destroy his legacy. So instead of creating suits of armor, which is what Justin hired him for, he changed them to robots so he could infiltrate the system and use them against Tony. Robert Downey Jr. continued to shine as Tony Stark, bringing depth and charisma to his character. However, we get a glimpse of his weakness in the movie: alcohol. The movie takes slight influence from an Iron Man comic book arc called Devil in a Bottle, which showcases how his addiction affects him and the Iron Man persona. The film does an okay job of bringing this to life, but it's only used for a scene or two. Also, I'm pretty sure he's not drunk, it's just palladium poisoning from his old arc reactor. The film also introduced Mickey Rourke as his formidable villain, Ivan Vanko, who brought a gritty edge to the story. He manages to recreate the arc reactor from his home, as his father was involved with the creation of the first arc reactor. However, Howard Stark pulled Ivan Vanko's father from the project, leaving him penniless. This sets Ivan on a mission to destroy the Stark's reputation. This character wasn't developed well throughout the movie. Rewatching it reminded me of how Gore the God Butcher was interpreted in Thor: Love and Thunder. He had a basic reason for his actions, went on a very strange revenge plot, and was quite a forgettable character. As you could tell, Rhodey had been recast this time around. He's now portrayed by Don Cheadle. I've mentioned the behind the scenes drama before. Don Cheadle does bring a calm yet intense role to the movie. Some other supporting characters in the movie include Pepper Potts and Happy Hogan, played by returning stars Gwyneth Paltrow and Jon Favreau. Their presence in this movie doesn't really expand on their characters in any way, but there are some important instances with Tony and Pepper. Tony promotes her to the CEO of Stark Industries, and they gain more traction as a couple by the end of the film. I think they start officially dating in the Avengers. Like I mentioned earlier, we get a debut of Nick Fury and Black Widow in the movie, as Marvel start to intertwine stories and characters. Nick Fury, played by Samuel L. Jackson, is a good inclusion to this, however he doesn't get much play in it. I do feel like his small role is all he needed though. Just a glimpse at this specific character makes him mysterious, and keeping him as this secluded and distrustful person hints towards bigger backstories. It really builds the character. They do a very similar thing with Natasha Romanoff, although we get more action from her. The hallway scene will always be my favourite Black Widow moment. She's just as cryptic as Nick Fury, but she shows us her heroics and definitely sets us up for her return in the Avengers. Iron Man 2 played a crucial role in expanding the MCU, setting the stage for future films with its introduction of key characters and story arcs. The use of S.H.I.E.L.D. and it being a prominent figure in the movie suggests how crucial it is to the later movies, and how it will interestingly play a massive role in the films like the Avengers. I said I'd come back to the element that Tony discovers or creates in the movie, which is incredibly vibranium. I thought this was an amazing theory at first, but it actually confirms this in the Iron Man 2 novelization. This blew my mind. I had no idea about this before researching it for the video, although I suppose it makes sense. If Tony's dad knew about vibranium from his time with Captain America, then he would have been curious as to what that element is. See how they were just paving the way this early on? This is why Phase 1 is perfect. Okay, now it's time for the trivial section of the video. Let's start it off with a very well known one. The kid that is almost killed by the Justin Hammer droid in the final act is played by Jon Favreau's son, and was rumoured to be Peter Parker, which has now been canonised by Kevin Feige himself. Scarlett Johansson was so eager for the role that she dyed her hair red before she was even cast. Mickey Rourke was technologically illiterate, so the scenes with him on a computer were apparently the most challenging. Justin Hammer's factory was actually filmed in Elon Musk's SpaceX facility. Elon Musk is also seen in the restaurant in Monaco before the race. Stan Lee has his usual cameo, this time representing a similar look to Larry King. As I'm rating these movies as I go along, Iron Man 2 solidly lands in the B tier for me. It does have ambitious storytelling and entertaining action, yet it struggles to intrigue me when it comes to the villain, and it also has some narrative challenges. Iron Man 2 successfully built on the foundation laid by its predecessor, advancing both Tony Stark's character arc and the overarching MCU storyline. While not without its flaws, the film remains a pivotal entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, continuing to captivate audiences with its blend of action, humor, and character development.
After the Avengers became a box office triumph, Iron Man 3 had big shoes to fill. The movie grossed over $1.2 billion worldwide, proving that audiences were still heavily invested in Tony Stark's solo adventures. This film was a bit lacking for me. I feel like they could have done more with the villains instead of whatever this is. But there are good portions of this movie, such as the mansion scene. It's a brilliant Tony Stark movie, just not a good Iron Man movie. As you could probably tell, I've got a cold during the recording of this, making my voice deeper than it usually is. But I'm excited to delve into Phase 2 of the Marvel Universe. So let's go.
Yes, it's the culmination from Iron Man 1 and 2, but it's also a follow-up to the Avengers, and in a way that liberates it to be more unique than anything that has come before.
Welcome back to the watch list. Today we take a look at Iron Man 3. If you don't mind leaving a like or possibly subscribing, that would be great. And that way you can follow me along for the ride as I cover every MCU movie before Avengers Doomsday hits the cinemas. Anyway, this film takes a bold new path, straying away from the story arcs similar to its predecessors. They do this by stripping Tony Stark of his tech and forcing him to rely on his ingenuity. Shane Black, known for his work on films like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which also stars Robert Downey Jr., and most recently the 2018's The Predator, which is not great, brings his signature style of action comedy while diving deeper into the emotions of the main characters. The film's narrative approach is interesting, as there's a few big twists, mainly involving Ben Kingsley's The Mandarin, which was and still is a very divisive moment in the MCU. Don't get me wrong, I like Ben Kingsley's role as Trevor Slattery, the British actor.
Don't hurt the face, I'm an actor.
Who doesn't even realise that his role is incredibly dangerous and bordering, probably already crossing the line of terrorism. He's just hilariously ignorant. It's a very arbitrary plot, but it has its moments. Act 1 introduces Tony's PTSD and anxiety attacks, while establishing the threat of the Mandarin. We see a vulnerable Tony Stark struggling with his experiences from the Battle of New York. Act 2 forces Tony to go back to basics after his mansion is destroyed and his suits are lost. It's basically bringing Tony back to the cave that Iron Man was born in. Act 3 culminates in a compelling finale featuring dozens of Iron Man suits, which I guess he could have just called earlier, Pepper's enhanced abilities, and the revelation of the true villain behind everything. The action sequences in Iron Man 3 are actually quite innovative, ranging from Tony fighting without his suit to controlling multiple suits remotely. The destruction of Tony's Malibu house was a momentous sequence, and one that I didn't even see coming when I first watched it, making this scene even more intense. The movie really shines with its use of practical effects. The mansion attack had some awesome real sets that they could actually blow up, with CGI added in to make it look even cooler. The Air Force One rescue was also pretty wild. They did a lot of real stunt work and then enhanced it with effects to create this crazy mid-air sequence. Using real effects whenever they could really made these big action scenes feel more grounded and intense. There's a bit of trivia I touch on later about this scene that is, well, record-breaking. Robert Downey Jr. delivers perhaps his most nuanced performance as Tony Stark, showing vulnerability and anxiety alongside his usual wit. There's a way in his acting where you can tell he's stressed, but he keeps it in, and that expresses his character and the way he is really well. Gwyneth Paltrow's Pepper Potts gets significantly more action scenes and finally suits up in the Malibu house attack sequence, while Don Cheadle returns as James Rhodes, or Iron Patriot, with an expanded yet familiar role. Ben Kingsley's portrayal of the Mandarin provides one of the film's most controversial yet memorable elements. Sorry, you might be able to hear my dog in the background squeaking her toy. While Guy Pearce brings complexity to Aldrich Killian as the true antagonist. However, Maya Hansen, played by Rebecca Hall, was originally intended to be the main villain in the script, as she is in the comic, but this was changed due to concerns about toy sales. This decision led to Aldrich Killian becoming the main villain of the movie. And of course, we can't forget Jon Favreau returning as Happy Hogan, and as he isn't directing this time around, his role is a bit more integral within the film.
Badge, guys.
One character I almost forgot to mention in this movie is Harley. His role in this film was essential, as it gave Tony something to bounce off of when it came to his mental health and his own parental issues. Ty Simpkins is a great actor. He just nails it in this. His kid roles throughout say 2010 to 2015, from Insidious to Jurassic World, were golden. Iron Man 3 directly addresses the aftermath of the Avengers, particularly how the New York battle and his trip to space, almost sacrificing himself, affected Tony psychologically. The film also sets up future developments in the MCU, including Tony's evolving relationship with his suits, and his growing concern about protecting Earth, cleverly folding into Age of Ultron. One scene that would have been really fun and would have connected to future projects was actually deleted due to RDJ being hesitant to carry on with the character of Tony Stark after this movie. The scene involved Tony Stark flying off into space to meet with the Guardians of the Galaxy, similar to some story arcs in the comics. I would have loved to see how this would have affected the Guardians movie. And of course, we get a tie-in to the Hulk as we see Bruce Banner in the post-credits, revealing that he is the person Tony has been narrating to for the entire film. So let's crack on with these tidbits about the film. Like I said earlier, I'd come back to the trivia about the Air Force One scene. The fact is that the film actually holds a Guinness World Record for the largest ever freefall stunt sequence, performed at 8,000 feet. That's wild. A brief scene featuring Yinsen from the first Iron Man is in a flashback at the beginning of the movie. This one's really cool. Anthony Mackie auditioned to play the Mandarin and ended up being cast as Sam Wilson / the Falcon in Captain America the Winter Soldier. A real news helicopter crashed during the filming in North Carolina. Thankfully, no one was seriously injured. Iron Man 3 deserves a solid B rating. While it takes bold risks with its character development and plot twists, some of these choices proved divisive among fans. However, its exploration of Tony Stark's character and innovative action sequences make it a significant entry in the MCU. Iron Man 3 successfully concludes the Iron Man trilogy by taking Tony Stark's character in a new direction. While some of its creative choices were controversial, the film's exploration of identity and trauma, combined with spectacular action sequences, creates an engaging superhero story. The movie proves that the MCU could take risks with established characters. It serves as both a satisfying conclusion to the Iron Man series and a stepping stone for Tony Stark's continued evolution in the MCU.
Looking back at these films now, it's remarkable how they managed to tell such a complete character arc across 3 movies, despite being intertwined with other Marvel movies. Although Iron Man only appeared in the Avengers between Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 3, it would be a completely different story with Thor's quadrilogy and Cap's trilogy. They probably make no sense watching them in succession. Each installment of Iron Man's trilogy peeled back another layer of Tony Stark's character, while raising the stakes personally and globally. The first film is up there with my favourite origin stories. It shows us a flawed character's journey to redemption. The second film, while sometimes criticised, crucially explored the weight of his legacy and responsibility. The third film brought everything full circle, stripping Tony down to his core to prove that the man makes the hero, not the suit. Some of my favourite moments from the trilogy include the original cave escape sequence, which still holds up incredibly well today. The Monaco Grand Prix scene from Iron Man 2 remains one of the most intense and exciting action sequences in the MCU. And finally, the personal and deep scenes within Iron Man 3, which shows us the vulnerability of a hero we never really get to see. The Iron Man trilogy, though, it didn't just launch the MCU. It told us a really intriguing story of Tony Stark's journey from a self-centered billionaire to a selfless hero. These films proved that superhero stories could tackle very deep situations in a character's life, at the same time as giving us some spectacular action scenes. While each film has its strengths and weaknesses, together they brought us an awesome story about redemption, humility, and the true meaning of heroism.